Thank you all for being here today.
Thank you, Senator Blumenthal. Senator Hirono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm glad that Senator Durbin acknowledged the presence of Ms. Rajakumar's mother. And I want to extend to you a very special aloha. I represent the state of Hawaii. And I, too, have had a very courageous mother who brought three children to this country to create a better life for us. And I am the only immigrant serving in the United States Senate right now. So a special aloha to you. Now, there is a consensus among Democrats and Republicans that we have a broken immigration system. So when you look at the over 11 million undocumented people who are here, we have over 800,000 dreamers who are actually signed up, with many, many more who could qualify. You have the undocumented dreamers, maybe 250,000 of them. You have all the people stuck waiting for their visas, practically in the hundreds of thousands. So there is agreement that our system is broken. Now, if you start with the proposition that we're going to need to do some sort of solution, come up with some sort of solution to the border situation, and that is how you're going to start immigration reform, then we're not going to get very far. That's one of the major reasons that we have not gone very far since 2013, when we actually managed to pass a bipartisan immigration bill that I thought was very comprehensive. It wasn't all that it could have been, of course, but immigration is screwed up in so many different areas that you hardly know where to begin. So as I'm sitting here listening to the testimony, Dr. Legomsky and Mr. Milned, I mean, you both have been working on immigration issues for a long time. And Ms. Rajakumar has lived it. If we were to put the two of you in a room and told you guys to come up with areas of agreement for what we can do with our broken immigration system, do you think you could do that? Do you think you could come up with something that we could work on?
I feel like that might be
Because if you
that might be the toughest
how do you
question that
expect
you've
us
sent
to do
our way. I mean, honestly, I think Professor and I would disagree on a number of things.
Yeah,
I think
well.
we would both be well intentioned, and I think we would be committed to roll up our shirt sleeves and get something done. I mean, it's an area where I think we would agree. These are hard issues to wrestle with, and everyone on either side is going to have to make compromises.
Yeah, I very much agree. I found Mr. Melmed to be an extremely reasonable person, especially given his comment that I would be an easy person to deal with. And it's true that there are many, many areas in which I think we would easily find agreement, some in which we might find agreement with a little bit of fine tuning, other areas in which I'm sure we would disagree. The real question is whether we could come up with a plan that we both agree on and that would pass both houses of Congress. I think that would be a tougher issue because I know there's a wider diversity of opinion within the Senate as well as within the House.
If you were to leave Congress out of it, and we asked you to come up with something that's reasonable that addresses the huge backlog we have, and all of the myriad problems that you have testified to, I would think that you would be able to come up with some reasonable areas that would enable us to go forward. But every time the word immigration comes up, there are members. Mainly, I would say, of the Republican Party, because I feel like I can say that since my friend there, Senator Cornyn, has castigated the Democrats. But really, there are a lot of Republicans run for the hills. But at the same time, I know that our ranking member really wants to get something done in this area. And I, after hearing this and talking with my colleague to my left, the chairman of the committee, I feel as though maybe we can get something done. In the area of who should have some sort of preference to come into our country, Mr. Melned, you said that we should enable people with certain skill sets, probably in the math and science areas. We certainly need workers in those areas. But I would just like to mention to you and this body, when we worked on the comprehensive immigration reform, there was a preference, I would say, for people with those kinds of backgrounds and experiences to have preference to come into our country with visas. Now, we have a huge need for domestic workers, for healthcare workers, et cetera. These are not people with science and technology backgrounds, and yet with the kind of preference that was in the original comprehensive immigration bill, a lot of women would have been left out of our immigration system. They would have been left out of of getting visas on their own. They would have had to marry usually the guy who had the STEM backgrounds and experiences. So I'd just like to note that because we have huge needs for all kinds of workers in this country. And I would not want us to get to just focus on the people with the so-called advanced degrees and those kinds of experiences. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for holding this hearing. My hope is that we can come up with something. And in fact, I'd welcome the two of you to suggest something to us based on the testimony that you provided today. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Hirono. We had a few minutes ago Senator Booker online to participate. Are you still there, Senator Booker? If you are, you're next for asking questions, and if not, then we will proceed with the second round of questions for members who are with us. I want to come back to Ms. Rajakumar, who, again, embodies the issue, one of the many challenges of our immigration system before us. I asked you previously what it would mean if the America's Children Act were to pass, but I want to go retrospective a little bit. How would your life have been different over the last few years if you had been able to get a green card already? And as you answer that, you can share with us also can you describe what would happen in your life and with your family if you had to leave the United States?
Thank you for your question. I think that permanent residency would have benefited me in many ways at several points in my life, but specifically over the past few years, especially once I turned 18, it would have given me the independence that I so badly desired. For example, I really wanted to be able to work when I was in college. The out-of-state tuition, as I mentioned in my testimony, children like me don't qualify for any university or federal financial aid. So the $70,000 of out-of-state tuition that my mom took upon herself was an exorbitant burden on my family. She jeopardized our only home, and my inability to support myself due to my inability to work was just an extra stress on the family. Not even being able to take care of my personal expenses. And then in addition, in 2019, if I had my permanent residency, I would have loved to have been able to take off a semester or even a year off school after my brother's passing and really mourn and process and heal and be there for my mother, and had the confidence that I could have picked up my education once again when I felt ready without any impact on my future. If I had to leave, first and foremost, after being separated from my mother, it means returning to a country that I've only ever been to twice before, a place where I have no place to live, no means of transportation, let alone a license, a career, or a support system, because apart from my mother, even my most immediate extended family reside in the U.S. So it would quite literally mean starting over completely from scratch. And my only other option of staying here would be to apply for an H-1B application, which would only further my work visa sponsorship and give me a couple more years, but at the end of which I will once again face self-deportation. And the problem again with these applications is they're fully luck-based, they're pure lottery, does not take into the account that the years that I have spent growing up here. And even if I were to be lucky enough to get an H-1B application and then be sponsored for my green card through my employer, as my mom did over a decade ago, I would once again fall towards the back of the line that she was in and the line that I aged out of. So neither option is very viable in my opinion.
And very real circumstances. I want to focus back on the employment-based immigration system for another moment. The number discussed as the numerical limit for employment-based green cards is 140,000. We've referenced that figure earlier in the hearing. But that number does not actually represent the number of people who petitioned for an employment-based green card. Spouses and children of immigrants who accompany an employment-based immigrant actually count against the 140,000 cap. I mentioned that in my opening statement. So therefore, less than half of the 140,000 employment green cards actually go to immigrants selected for employment reasons. A question for both Mr. Legomsky and Mr. Melvin. Can you discuss how exempting spouses and children from the cap would improve our immigration system?
It would have the same kind of beneficial effect with slightly different numbers as some of the other bases for increasing the total cap, such as increasing the base number, recapturing unused visas, eliminating the deduction for immediate relatives, and so on. I see a proposal to exempt the dependents from the cap as being in that same vein, and I think they would all have the same benefits. They would greatly shorten the waiting times for people who, after all, are going to be admitted at some point anyway. It's just that this would allow them to be admitted sooner rather than later, thereby helping the employers who need their essential labor right now, rather than forcing them to wait in the future.
Mr. Moment?
I agree with Professor Legomsky. I don't have anything else to add other than you can see the snowball effect that when you have a 10-year backlog for a green card, people will marry, they will have children. Those folks are then being added to the line. So a little bit of an explanation of why that backlog is increasing even while doing nothing, just by nature of families growing.
I think it speaks both to the backlog and trying to address the backlog, and at the same time, the purpose for which this was intended to impact employment and the economy. And when a majority of the numbers are not the sponsored entity, but spouses and children of, that's limiting the employment and economic contribution side. So it makes sense to me. Senator